Good evening, everybody. Is this, it is on, I think. No, it is. Brian, can you hear me? There we go. It just need to be a little closer. Or actually, he's turning the sound up. Well, welcome, everybody. As you know, I'm Lisa Simpson-Lutz. I'm the Executive Director of the Castine Historical Society. And I want to welcome you to our 15th annual Deborah Pulliam Memorial Lecture. As many of you know, Deborah Pulliam, who passed away in 2007, was a major benefactor for not only the Castine Historical Society, but also for the Witherley Memorial Library, Castine's Unitarian Universalist Congregation, and the Maine Community Foundation. We are forever grateful for her generosity that transformed our historical society into what it is today. Tonight's lecture is not only an in-person event, but we are live streaming the event via our YouTube channel. So thank you to all of those out there who are watching tonight from afar, and I gather we have quite an audience from afar who are interested in hearing our speaker. This event is also being recorded, so if you know someone who is not here who wants to see it, it will be uploaded onto the website. Usually it takes about a week before it gets uploaded. And all of our lectures are uploaded on the website. So if you go on there and take a look, you may find some really interesting talks that you might have missed. We have a number of programs upcoming, including our annual meeting on August 22nd at 4 o'clock, and that will be held again at the Castine Inn, and everyone is invited. And then on Saturday, September 7th at 10 o'clock, Georgia Zildjian and I will be offering a walking tour on Castine's African American history. This event is limited to 20 people, and pre-reservation is required. So you can do that by either calling the Historical Society or signing up online. I hope you'll want to learn about our current exhibition. It's a history of Castine in 40 objects, and also about our upcoming programs. All of that you can learn about on the website, and of course, I do encourage you to come visit to see the exhibit. If you're not familiar with us, in the entryway, there were our newsletter, most recent newsletter, and a membership form. If you are currently not a member of the Historical Society, we hope that you will consider joining. Members receive our scholarly newsletter, special pricing for events, and a 10% discount in our gift shop. Plus, as a member, you're helping fund the exhibitions and educational programs like what you are seeing tonight. So I am thrilled to introduce our Pulliam speaker, Hans Strauch, who will be speaking on Rising from the Ashes, Building on Restituted Family Property in Post-Nazi Berlin, Germany. Hans has an international architectural firm, HDS Architecture, based in Boston. He has collaborated with leading design developers, property owners, and private institutions, both nationally and internationally, to create high-profile buildings in the communities in which they are built. His firm has designed well over $1 billion of construction projects since its inception 35 years ago. Hans received his architectural degree at Cornell University. He leads a highly talented team of designers and architects, all currently collaborating on several large-scale residential, commercial, and retail destinations in the North and Southeast. Hans and his wife, Doris, have a house here in Castine, which we're going to hear about, and which, of course, Hans designed. We look forward to his talk tonight about his family's legacy in Berlin, Germany. So please welcome Hans Strauch.
Yes, now you hear me. Great, thank you, Brian. I am really excited to tell you the story of my work in Berlin, but let me tell you, I love Castine, Maine. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we found Castine, but we being Doris, my wife, We have been coming here for 35 years. We first came here 35 years ago, and we have never missed a year since that time coming here. We built a house here 20 years ago. The house is located across from the Elms, formerly the Manor. And every time we come here, I love it, and every time I leave here to go back to work in Boston, I'm pretty much unhappy. But I'm here right now, so I'm very happy. So thank you, Castine Historical Society, for inviting me for this year's Pulliam lecture. I am, of course, honored to be invited. And I'm so happy to see all of you. Many of you I see here are familiar faces. Some of you I know, and some of you I don't know well. But I see a lot of you as I take my walks around Castine. As you know, I'm an architect. That's my day, and as Derry would say, also my night job. I have another job, and that is chair of the board of Lesley University in Cambridge. And Lesley is the largest educator of teachers and mental health counselors in the Northeast. We also have a terrific and a wonderful school of art called Lesley Art and Design. I'd like to thank Maine Maritime Academy for loaning us the space, Historical Society space. We're on the campus of Maine Maritime Academy. And interestingly enough, Lesley University and Maine Maritime Academy have a shared benefactor. The Alfond Lunder family, you may well know, they have a building right next door here. They donated the funds for a building for the Harold Alfond Student Center. We at Lesley University in Cambridge have the Lunder Arts Center. And that is an incredible family that understands the importance of education. Lesley and Maine Maritime Academy are also in the same athletic conference, so we are friendly competitors. So those are interesting connections. So I'm turning this on, and I think I figured it out. There we go. This evening, I'm going to be talking about the resurrection of a family name and its legacy, and the reincarnation of the family's former property in Berlin. Both my parents fled Nazi Germany, my father in 1933, and my mother in 1938. Each with their own story of narrow escape. My mother, Maria, was from Hamburg. She was an artist. Her father, Hans Gerson, and her uncle, Oscar Gerson, were architects. The name of the firm was Gerson and Gerson, and many of their buildings still stand today in central Hamburg. My father, Karl, with a K, was from Berlin, and he is the connection to the Mosse name. His stepfather was Hans Lachmann Mosse. My father was a professor of physics at Harvard University. My parents met in Berkeley, California. Both of their families settled there after fleeing Germany. 1989 was an important year in world history, and for me personally. As many of you know, the fall of the Berlin Wall paved the way for German reunification, which formally took place in 1990. Also in 1989, I started my firm in Boston, HDS Architecture. In 1989, these are all fall events, fall being November. In 1989, Derry and I got married. And we also discovered Castine on our mini-moon, as it's called these days. We were married on November 18th, and it was just before Thanksgiving, and I researched bed and breakfast inns all along the New England coast, and the only one open at that time frame was the Pentagoet Inn. So we stayed at the Pentagoet Inn for 3 days. We fell in love with Castine, and we've been coming back here ever since. Another major event occurred just for the younger people in the crowd, and I don't see too many younger people in the crowd, but I think you'll appreciate this. Another major event happened in 1989. Taylor Swift was born in 1989. And I have to thank Susie Schusterman from my office, who reminded me of that, or told me that important fact as we were preparing my speech today. My family had one of the first and possibly the very first successful land restitution claim in all of Eastern Europe when the wall came down. Designing a new building on land owned by my ancestors represented an awesome task for me as an architect. It was also an incredible challenge and responsibility. The building is named after Rudolf Mosse, a name that was erased over 90 years ago, following the January 1933 when the Nazis rose to power, marking the beginning of the Third Reich. Born in 1843, Rudolf Mosse was a progressive liberal voice and a philanthropist in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. He founded a publishing and advertising empire consisting of 130 newspapers and journals, including the flagship newspaper, the Berliner Tageblatt. His outlets were all over Berlin and the countryside. He was one of the wealthiest and most influential men in all of Germany. Understanding the importance of education, he founded a boarding school in Berlin for impoverished children. He insisted that it serve an equal number of Jewish and Christian children. As philanthropists, the Mosse family led multiple projects throughout their lives, helping the economically disadvantaged. Rudolf Mosse built his Berlin home on Leipziger Platz, and it was number 15. It was known as the Mosse Palais, colored here in the reddish color of number 15. The octagon-shaped plaza was originally laid out in 1737 as a symbolic entrance and gateway to the city. Leipziger Platz was used by the Prussian royal family, including Frederick the Great, en route to Potsdam Palace in Sanssouci. Architecturally, it was one of the most distinguished spaces in Berlin. In the 1920s and 30s, over 4,500 streetcars crossed Leipziger Platz each day. A little busier than Main and Water here in Castine. This area was full of life and vitality. The Palais contained an enormous art collection amassed by Rudolf Mosse. The art collection was considered one of Germany's richest and most magnificent collections, second only to Emperor Wilhelm II. The building was open to the public, similar to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. Just to give you a sense of scale, if you look at the balcony over the main entrance, you see two people there. Upon Rudolf Mosse's death in 1920, his son-in-law Hans Lachmann Mosse, my step-grandfather, took over the publishing empire. During this time, the area around Potsdamer Platz and Leipziger Platz was one of Europe's major urban centers, and a symbol of Berlin as a metropolis. This is a picture of the courtyard on the opposite side of the facade that you saw earlier. The building fronted two streets. In 1933, everything changed. The Berliner Tageblatt was an outspoken critic of Adolf Hitler and the National Socialists. The Mosse family became a symbol of the hated Jewish press. The Nazis confiscated the holdings of the Rudolf Mosse Company, including all the newspapers, all the family's properties, and the prized art collection. The art collection was auctioned off. Hitler's chancellery was constructed across the street from the Mosse house. There is the gateway that you saw the opposite side of in the earlier photo. This is a picture of the chancellery of Hitler. And that's a picture of the street across from the building after the chancellery had been constructed. So if you look down to the lower left-hand side where you see 21, that's the Mosse Palais building on Leipziger Platz, and across the street is the Chancellery, and the reddish color up there is the bunker, Hitler's bunker. This is the catalog that was published to accompany the sale of the art collection. Little did the Nazis know that this very document would play a significant role in identifying the looted art pieces 75 years later. This auction occurred in 1934. What also amazes me is that the name of a hated Jewish person was highlighted on this catalog to entice people, Nazis in this case, to purchase the art. Today, this art collection represents the largest art restitution project in Europe, with well over 1,000 works registered in the Lost Art database. The project is known as the Mosse Art Restitution Project, and it is being led by my brother Roger. More on that subject later. Then came the Second World War. Leipziger Platz was reduced to a rubble by Allied bombing in 1945. You can imagine the bombers all knew where the chancellery was. All they had to do was look for an octagonal space and drop them. The Mosse Palais is to the left there, and then if you look farther to the left, there is the chancellery. In 1961 came the construction of the infamous Berlin Wall, separating an isolated West Berlin from the communist East Berlin in East Germany. Leipziger Platz became an urban no man's land. Complete destruction was accomplished. History was erased with hardly a trace. So you can see the streets, the street of the octagonal space, and then the other street to the left of it, it's called Wasstrasse. Everything was leveled. To the left, maybe some of you visited, and I did as well, is the Potsdamer Overlook. So to the left is west, and to the right, up to the right of this photo is east. Another interesting map shows in the red East Germany, to the left West Germany, and in the midst of East Germany is Berlin, in this case yellow being West Berlin. And if you approach this visual, without knowing all the facts, you'd think that the red was trying to contain the yellow from escaping, but it was actually the other way around. The wall was built around West Berlin to keep people from escaping from the east into the west. In West Berlin, the Potsdamer Platz overlook provided a glimpse of a space that once was. I visited Berlin in 1982 with my brother for the first time. This was a photograph I took. We had no idea of the extent of our family history in Berlin. Our parents shared very little of their painful past with us. I remember asking my mother's cousin, Elizabeth, who was the last of the family who escaped Germany to live, and she did die a short time after I asked her this question. I asked her, what was it like to leave Germany, to essentially escape Germany, leaving all your belongings behind, everything? Just a few things came with them. And her response shocked me. She said, Hans, we never thought about it along those terms. We had our family. Everything was about having our family. The wall came down in 1989, and in 1990, Germany was reunified, and Berlin became a single city again. Literally, this umbilical cord, if you want to call it, cuts right through the octagonal-shaped space. You can see traces of the Leipziger Platz. In 1993, the claim for restitution was settled, and ownership of Leipziger Platz property was restored to the Musse family. A new chapter began, an opportunity to resurrect the Musse family name, its place in history, and to participate in one of the largest reconstruction projects in the world. Following the ownership of restitution of the property, a fence was put up to contain the property. This is a photograph I took. And the first order of business was to do a bomb survey of the property, of undetonated bombs. The whole time I worked in Berlin over a period of 7 or 8 years, you could hear explosions in the distance of bombs having been removed and detonated outside the city. It was pretty amazing. The property was ultimately sold to a German developer, Hans Gruder. And by the way, a lot of people named with Hans. I like that. That's the fourth Hans, by the way, if you've been keeping track. There was no stipulation that a member of the family, that being me, be involved with the property's redevelopment. I decided to meet this Hans, as I was already working internationally, and I dropped into Berlin and met him. I arrived at the Hilton Hotel on Gendarmenmarkt, where a note greeted me saying, I will pick you up for dinner at 6 p.m. I was waiting at the front door, expecting to see a shiny Mercedes coming to pick me up for dinner. But no, it wasn't. It was a green-colored, shiny Buick Fifth Avenue. The two Hunses had a great time together. We talked a lot about our mutual interest in real estate and development and architecture. He asked me if I would consider being the architect for the redevelopment of the property he just purchased, the Mussa property, and I said, okay. It was a little bit more complicated than that, but we formed a partnership. A master plan for over 10 million square feet had already been created by the city for the Potsdamer Leipziger Platz space, with some of the properties controlled by world business powerhouses such as Daimler-Benz, Sony, and ABB. The master plan which dictated the development of our property was based on what was called critical reconstruction, a theory regarding the reconstruction of Berlin. Hans Stimmann, another Hans, was Berlin's director of city planning at the time, and it was his responsibility to oversee the urban redesign of the city. The three Hanses did eventually get together when it was time to have our project approved. The goal of the master plan was to return to traditional living city urbanism, encouraging development that mimicked pre-World War II Berlin. Requirements included maximum building heights, minimum setbacks, stone exteriors, not all steel and glass, 20% residential component in every project, buildings respecting the historical street grid and property lines. Lots of rules. Like many cities, politics and power were part of the mix. So, for example, if you look to the right in that picture, the Sony Tower exceeds the building height restriction originally imposed on the site, and it's constructed out of steel and glass. Our design work started with the basic master plan building blocks. Quite frankly, I loved learning this new approach to city building. Also, a unique aspect of the design was that the building fronted on two streets, as I mentioned before, Leipziger Straße on the rear. Leipziger Straße in the front and Vossstraße in the rear. The majority of the building was to be primarily office use, with the required 20% residential use on the upper floors. Now that we had established an approach to the massing of the building, the skeleton, we were ready to create the face, the facade, the visual representation. Back to the streets of Berlin, back to history. During my many walks in the evenings through East Berlin, when I first came there, I was struck by how many buildings had the markings of machine gun fire. It was as if I was on a stage set. You can imagine the human destruction, just pure craziness that was going on, and death. By the way, the East communists didn't have the money to improve these buildings, so they basically were frozen in time following the creation of the wall. The original Mussapelle was 22 meters high with a pronounced base, middle, and top. A focal tower marked the center of Leipziger Platz. A splendid frieze graced the top of the building. The house reflected the liberal values and prominence of the Rudolf Mussa family in Berlin. I wanted to express this prominence in the new building. The base of the building was designed to be open and inviting while having a sense of permanence and stability. I wanted the eye to travel up the facade to a defining focal point that has now become known as the crown, marking the center of the Platz. The Mussa name was to be permanently placed on a stone band at the original height of the frieze. That name can never be removed. The new building echoes the original building while having its own identity. I wanted a design that would reverberate for many years, one that would speak to the past, present, and future. Construction began on July 6, 1995. The initial construction occurred with great celebration and publicity. It was at the same time as the rebirth of the Reichstag. Prior to renovations, it was wrapped in more than 1 million square feet of aluminum-colored fabric by the famous environmentalist artists Christo and Jean-Claude, symbolizing a new beginning. It was at once a work of art and a cultural event. As the Mosse Palais construction moved forward, Hans Rude had a terrific idea to help bring further attention to the project and to enhance our commitment to reconciliation. Let's give some space in the building to an important American Jewish organization for 10 years free rent. After meeting, that sounds pretty crazy if you're a real estate developer giving away space for rent. It was a small space, but it was a good enough space. After meeting with several organizations in the United States, I was introduced to the American Jewish Committee. I met David Harris, CEO of the American Jewish Committee, also known as AJC in New York City. I became convinced that the American Jewish Committee was the right choice to be the building's first occupant. A deal was struck. To me, there is nothing more exciting than to see a new building emerge. Quite frankly, I love the smell of concrete. My wife thinks I'm nuts. We visited a quarry and chose the location of the stone that would be used to clad the new building. Architecture, in my opinion, is not frozen music. A building has a life of its own. It interacts with the community in which it exists. It supports human activity and interaction. For this building, I felt facing the history, it's the history of the property, and honoring the Mosse legacy of the property would be necessary to inform the design. On February 9th, 1998, the Mosse Palais was completed and the American Jewish Committee moved into their offices at a central location at a time when the city of Berlin was redefining itself. A mezuzah was placed on the doorstop or the doorpost as a sign of faith. My uncle, George Mosse, a world-renowned professor of European history at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, who's the grandson of Rudolf Mosse, delivered the following words at the opening celebration. It is both gratifying and fitting that the American Jewish Committee will have its future home in the Mosse Palais. An important continuity in German Jewish tradition is preserved. This house was the residence of my grandparents. The house itself symbolized the deeply held liberalism of a tolerant and educated bourgeoisie, a liberalism which was reflected in the Mosse publishing enterprises and above all in the Berliner Tageblatt. Let us remember as we rejuvenate this house the traditions which were once shared by Germans and Jews alike, the traditions of a better Germany. I would like to recall the figure which once graced the facade of the Mosse Palais as providing a signpost to the happiness of its new inhabitants. A large female figure held a mirror in her right hand, while the left hand supported the bird of wisdom. The inscription read, "The Enlightenment." May the spirit of the Enlightenment, in spite of the past and even some nationalist tendencies in the present, once again guide this house. The building stood alone for several years while the rest of the city grew around it. It was the first building to be constructed in the no man's land, also known as the death strip of the Berlin Wall, a wall that symbolized the Cold War. As we waited for the other buildings to be completed, an interesting story emerged relating to the Mosse Palais art collection. In the original building's courtyard, before I get there, sorry, this is a great photo showing sort of the process from the evolution from 1987 to 2000 at the same location. So back to where I was. In the original building's courtyard stood a fountain that was designed by the German sculptor Walter Schott in the early 1900s. It was known as the Three Dancing Maidens. It was purchased by Rudolf Mosse and placed in the courtyard as a symbol of vital serenity and optimism, qualities he owned until his death in 1920. When the Nazis confiscated the property, they stole all the artwork, including the sculpture. This photo shows the same sculpture sitting in the Conservatory Garden in Central Park, New York City. It is known as the Untermeyer Fountain. Those of you from New York City would know about Untermeyer in Yonkers. I was briefly excited by the idea that it might be the same one from the Mosse Palais. It turned out it was not. This shows where the location is of that fountain. There were several castings. The original sits on the grounds of the Schlitz Hotel, 1.5 hours by car northwest of Berlin. This sculpture is included in the Mosse Art Project and is yet to be restituted. Many other pieces have been identified and have been successfully returned. Around the turn of the century, Rudolf Mosse commissioned August Gaul's reclining lion. He displayed the lion in his sculpture hall at his home in Leipziger Platz. When Hitler came into power, the property was confiscated and rebranded as the headquarters of the Academy of German Law, a kind of Nazi think tank run by the vicious anti-Semite Frank, who later became the governor of Nazi-occupied Poland. The lion was moved to the courtyard, replacing the Three Dancing Maidens, presumably because the lion was viewed by Nazi officials as a much more fitting symbol. Frank, who oversaw the murder of hundreds of thousands of Polish civilians and millions of Polish Jews, was executed in 1946 by the International Military Tribunal in Nuremberg. In 1945, the Red Army overtook Berlin, raised the Soviet flag over the Reichstag. The lion was discovered in the ruins of the Palais. I assume you can see it in the photograph. 3 Red Army soldiers pose with the Mosse lion. The lion ultimately became part of the East Germany National Gallery collection. It was restituted successfully in 2015, and in 2016 it was sold back to the German government. It now sits prominently in the entry hall of the new James Simon Gallery in central Berlin. The gallery opened in summer of 2019. And by now, I would imagine thousands of people have passed by the lion, and they have no idea of the story I just told you. All there is a plaque that identifies the lion having originally been in the collection of Rudolf Mosse. I must say the similar thing happens to many other pieces of art. People don't really know all the history of the things that they walk by. But this one, this poor lion, it's got a big story to tell. Not long ago, my brother and I traveled to Düsseldorf to officially receive this Peter Paul Rubens painting, which was successfully restituted. It was in the collection of the city's art museum. It was subsequently sold at auction. A few years ago, this painting by Gary Melchers called Winter was repatriated to the Mosse family by the FBI. It was in the possession of the Arkell Museum in Canajoharie, New York. It took 3 years to restitute this painting. What was once an empty space dividing 2 cities and 2 countries has been reunified. Leipziger Platz and Potsdamer Platz have now been completely rebuilt. Finally, the Mosse Palais rests within an existing context. Last year was the 20th anniversary of the building. The building continues to represent a stable asset to its present owners. Several years ago, I took my 2 daughters to Berlin for their first visit. I felt it was important for them to learn about their ancestors. Someday they will have to carry the torch. We are now German citizens and have dual citizenship. We took advantage of a law that allows direct descendants of German citizens who lost citizenship for racist, political, and religious reasons to become naturalized citizens. Another property that was restituted was the Mosse Zentrum, headquarters of the original Mosse publishing house, designed by the famous expressionist architect Erich Mendelsohn in 1923. Hired by my step-grandfather, Hans Lachmann Mosse, this was Mendelssohn's first major commission, the redesign of the facade of the existing building. It became an instant landmark in Berlin. And by the way, his design associates on this project was the famous modernist Richard Neutra, for those of you who understand or know a lot about architectural history. World War II destroyed the building. It was patched together and literally cut apart. Literally on the left is where the wall stood. It fronted it's no man's land of the wall at that location, and basically embalmed and became office space and a printing house. Continued amazingly as a printing house even during the East Germany or communist occupation. It has now been restored close to its original design. As architects, my firm has been involved with several other projects in Berlin, all located on the eastern side of the former Berlin Wall in the Mitte district. These building designs include office and residential structures, one near Checkpoint Charlie. In 2015, Germany commemorated its Day of Unity to mark the 25th anniversary of the unification of East and West Germany. In Berlin, lights traced where the Berlin Wall once existed. In conclusion, the great European city has been rebuilt, and the Mossen name has been restored. It was a terrific opportunity for me individually as an architect to design a building on a site of historic significance, to resurrect an important Jewish name, to create a home for the American Jewish Committee at a pivotal time in Berlin and Germany's history, and to be the first building constructed in the no man's land of the Berlin Wall, a symbol of the Cold War, was an extra special and rare opportunity. It's been an honor for me to present this story to all of you and this distinguished group of people in the audience here today. I want to thank the Castine Historical Society for inviting me. And I just have two words that I always conclude this talk with: justice and hope. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm available to answer questions. And we have the microphone up and running.
Take this around so that the people who are watching on YouTube can hear. And I can get my exercise.
It was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Permitting in Berlin must be easier than it is in Boston, because you got this done very quickly after the wall came down. I just wondered if you could talk about that process a bit.
Sure, absolutely. Well, again, this was some time ago, and certainly things have gotten more complicated getting projects permitted in the city of Boston or many of our cities. The fact that the center, the capital of Berlin was being moved from one place, one location in Berlin, one location in Germany to Berlin, meant they had to get buildings built. That city had to be constructed quickly. So that's one point. The other point is there were specific rules, specific aspects that I explained about the project that we had to fit in. We did try to exceed some of those. There's always an intention to try to do more than what you're allowed to. But nonetheless, there were very defined parameters. So that really wasn't, it was all approved master plan, had already been created. So we just had to fit into that master plan. One thing that we did do is we exceeded the maximum height of 35 meters by that. And I was pleased that the head of urban planning, Hans Stimmann, agreed to let us do that, because there was some others in his group that said, no, you shouldn't be allowed to. Everything needs to be there. And I argued that we were in the center, literally in the center of the space, like the keystone of the space. It needed to have a marker. So after a while, it became very enthusiastic support. Yep.
Hans, thank you for the presentation. It's wonderful. You showed a handful of pieces of art that have been restituted.
Yep.
There must be hundreds of more pieces. What is the status of those?
Sure. I'll speak briefly on it. As I said earlier, this is my brother Roger's project, but what I can tell you, as you heard, there are about 1,000 pieces, and close to only 50 have been restituted. And currently active, maybe a dozen right now are being pursued. It's not easy work. For those of you who are interested in finding out more about it online, you can go to MARI, Massa Art Restitution. Just those 3 words will get you to finding out more about what the status is. It's very hard work. There have been some very fine pieces that have been restituted. Many are in museums, as you can imagine. They're in full view, right? The ones that aren't in full view, that are spread out literally around the world, not an easy task to find those. Yeah. Did you have a question? Was there another question over here? Yeah. Okay, answered already.
Oh, thank you very much for the talk.
Sure.
It's greatly appreciated. In my reading of the history of Judaism in Berlin and the unfortunate demise of many of the upper-class Jews in Berlin, and particularly, and that a lot of these people were secular Jews. They weren't very religious. I was just wondering if that was the experience with your family.
Yes. Secular, correct. Although I can't tell you exactly, and I'm not in a position to tell you exactly how religious my grandparents were, but I can tell you that my parents, fleeing Germany, first of all, they were secular. When they came to the United States, it wasn't easy even being here in the United States, being Jewish. So anything religious was pretty much left behind. We were not brought up as religious Jewish, but I feel connected, but we are, as you say, secular. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Yes, sir.
How big is your family?
Say that again?
How big is your family?
How big? Meaning
Massa
Massa family. I'll just tell you a joke. Once I had, that just reminded me, I'll come back to seriousness, but I like funny things too. I had a client ask me, how big are you? He was from Texas. And I said, I'm 165. He said, that's big, you're hired. So how big is the Massa family? They're not, not very big. You know, you can see I'm struggling to give you numbers here. There are direct descendants, a couple of direct descendants who still are living. I am a descendant, but I'm a my father was adopted into the Massa family essentially by his stepfather, Hans Lachmann Massa. So it's not in a huge family. There are larger family representations than ours. If we haven't made it we haven't taken the time to sort of trace the Massa descendants across the world, so I can't tell you where everyone is. We do know in Great Britain there is a Massa, and other places, but we haven't taken the time to do that kind of research.
All right. Well, I think that might be our last question. So once again,
I have one last thing to say.
Okay, do say one more thing.
So I'm going to give a plug to the Castine Historical Society.
Well, that's okay. And I didn't pay him to do this.
So we know the expression history repeats itself, right? It's sort of like, well, it does repeat itself. And we can see it happening all across our globe right now. I was reading through the vision statement of the Castine Historical Society, and one paragraph struck me. It reads, "We value questions, new ideas, and unexpected connections and discoveries that arise through inquiry. We welcome challenging conversations and opportunity to learn from our mistakes. We recognize that willingness to change our minds is crucial to understanding history and applying it to the present." How could you argue with that? Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for coming, and have a lovely evening.